Well, thank you all for coming. I think we've reached a nice critical mass. We just to go over the agenda a little bit. We will shortly be moving into our breakout sessions that you signed up for when you registered. So some of you will be joining Matt to get a summary of our legislative agenda results. And some of you will be joining me for a new member session. But right now, I would like to turn it over to our steering committee president, Margaret Atkinson, with some brief remarks to start us off.
Thanks, Dan. I'm Margaret Atkinson. I work at the Winston Prouty Center down in Brattleboro, and I want to welcome our members and guests to the Vermont Early Childhood Advocacy Alliance annual membership meeting. For those who are new, the Alliance is a statewide coalition of early childhood professionals, parents, and employers working together to improve public policies that impact young children and families on issues of health, safety, food security, economic security, and early care and education. We're here today to reflect on our struggles and successes, to learn from our guests, and to begin to plan our efforts for 2022 and beyond. I just want to take a moment on behalf of the steering committee to thank the Alliance staff, Dan Brown, Amy Russo-Perler, and Matt Levin for all their work during the past year, and also to thank lead organizations and advocates for all the work that you've done this year to advance our issues. I hope soon that we will be able to combine the best of what we've learned from adapting to this unusual year with the things that we know that have worked in the past that are both effective and perhaps more enjoyable. And with that, I will turn this back over to Dan and we can get to our breakout sessions.
Thank you, Margaret. Yes, so please stick with us for a second as we start the transition to our breakout rooms.
Wonderful. I have moved everyone according to their preference on their sign-up sheet. If anybody would like to join the introduction session with Dan, give me a wave or drop me a line in the chat. Otherwise, Matt, the floor is all yours.
Great. Thanks, Lorna. Thanks, everyone, for coming and for making the time for the meeting. We still live in strange times, don't we? Just sitting here today, trying to get myself ready for this meeting and thinking how different it is compared to being together in person. So we're really lucky to have Lorna and her team with us. So if you have any tech problems, just go ahead and put something in the chat. Lorna, you got the note in the chat about Tanika wanting to switch over. Great. So what we're going to do in this session is I'm going to go through the legislative agenda and share with you summaries of what we think has happened on each of the issues. Some of the folks here on our tile array know more about this than I do for sure. So some of the lead organizations, I think most of the lead organizations are represented here in our array. So at the risk of offending, unless I say something that's really like completely wrong, let me just continue to roll through to the end of the summary, and then you can chime in then and expand on it. I want to make sure I get all the way to the end. But if we have something totally wrong, definitely let me know. But the summaries are based on information that we got from you all, right? So I'm hoping that we're able to keep it accurate all the way through. All right, Lorna, you ready to run the slides, please? So now we're going to go to slide view. So now all the tiles just went to the top. So we cannot see you clearly. If you have a question, you could try the raise hand function if you like the blue hand thing, or you could just shout out, but waving your hands will probably not achieve the result you're looking for. Okay, so off we go. Let's go to the next slide. So there are 11 issues on our legislative agenda. There are a few extra things that we're going to toss in at the end. And it was a very, very busy session, and there were a lot of incredible accomplishments that were achieved that the lead organizations and all of us worked incredibly hard on. So these are not in any particular order, except the order that they appeared on a document that we have used in the past. They're not prioritized in any way, shape, or form. So the first thing though on the list is the childcare early childhood education workforce combined issue. That started out in H-171 and then transitioned into a split between the bill and the budget. You can see here what's listed, very large investments relative to the past, very large investments. And you can see that simplified CCFAP, workforce, IT, and the systems analysis that is going to be done. It also has language embedded in the budget as part of this, which states the goals that are very important. And there's language that it requires the stakeholder input on the allocation of the federal COVID response funds directly related to childcare. So a package, it had a long road, but it had a very successful outcome. Just about all of these issues, they're not actually final because we don't have final signature on most of these bills, but we anticipate the governor is going to sign all of them. So we don't expect any more hiccups in the system, in the process. So next on this slide, you see reach up funding. Important to note here that the governor initially recommended in his budget a $5 million underutilization sweep that the legislature rejected. So not only do we have an up, we have the rejection of a down. So it's sort of a double win. There was an initial one-time payment for reach up families, and then that grew into a second round of increases that weren't just one time. So the legislature, with the Senate leading on this one, eliminated the SSI disregard that, for those of you who have been working on this issue for years, maybe remember, there was a double count that was put into the budget that made it so that families with someone within the family who has a disability, they actually got a reduction in their benefits. And that was something that no one really liked, but they went along with in the legislature. So they finally got rid of that at the tune of $470,000. That's an annual thing. So they did it for this year, and that's in the base. Similarly, this $2.3 million increase to the reach up standard of need, that's an ongoing base increase. We don't know yet if it's going to be the 2019 or the 2020 level, but that's a really big increase in benefits for reach up families. I don't have the numbers for what that means on a week-to-week basis, but I know the folks at Voices do. And if people are interested, you could put it in the chat or let us know. We can get back to that later. Finally, really interesting language that the Senate insisted on being in there that would eliminate this sweep that the governor recommended, at least for the next fiscal year. It wasn't a permanent change, it was just a one-time change, but we hope to make that permanent so that if there is any caseload underutilization, we keep that money in the Reach Up program and it goes out as a one-time payment for families. Next slide. So 3 more issues. Don't take the limited amount of text here to mean that not a lot happened for one of these in particular. So for family medical leave insurance, there was no state level action, but the federal action is pending. There's been a lot of activity on this issue, but there wasn't any legislative specific activity beyond introducing H-134, the bill that we hope will be the carrier for action for next year. On the Parent-Child Center, important to note when it comes to lingo, they have renamed this grant. It's no longer called the Master Grant, it's called the Integrated Grant. A bill was introduced to make some changes to the PCC statutes and other improvements to the system, S91, that did make some progress, but on the Senate side, but then stopped in appropriations. Still, that was definite progress to get that bill rolling. Also, the Senate put in a one-time allocation of $3.7 million for PCCs that was accepted in the final budget. And again, that's one time. That's a lot of money. That's going to be divided equally amongst all the PCCs. And last on this slide, Children's Integrated Services, a huge victory, $1.5 million increase in base funding, which will bring the per member per month rate up to $600. That is a huge victory. We've been working on that for years. It's about halfway of the increase that we'd hoped to get, but that's the first increase for CIS really ever. So really big victory there that is the product of long time advocacy by a whole bunch of people on this call and others, and support of key legislators too. Okay, next slide, please. The next issue is one of the most complex ones in our whole set, housing and homelessness and help for those experiencing homelessness. So much activity here. I really hardly even know where to start. I guess I'll just let the bullet points there speak for themselves. One of the disappointments was that S79 failed in the last day of session to get a procedural vote that it needed to pass. There's been a lot of press coverage on that. The Republicans refused to suspend the rules in the House to let it go all the way through. We hope that that'll get taken up in the first week of January when they come back. Huge investments that were proposed by the governor, huge investments agreed to by the legislature, a lot of uncertainty about how those investments will actually be spent and how quickly they'll go, but a hope that putting all this money into the system will make the transition from the hotel-based program that we have now, the GA Emergency Housing Program. When that ends, there are going to be a lot of people looking for housing. It's going to be a very rocky road for a whole bunch of families, and it's not going to be pretty for some. We know that. But the hope is that these investments will at least get several hundred units of housing online ASAP and make that transition just a little bit easier. There'll be a lot more to come on housing in the future years. Vermonters Feeding Vermonters, you can see that there was no real intense consideration of this program, but there was some very serious financial support offered to the food bank to help them in their continued efforts. The food box program that they ran in the first few months of this year, they got reimbursement for that, and they got a one-time payment, support from pandemic response funds so that they can continue doing their expanded work that they've been doing in pandemic response. Okay, next slide, please. So universal school meals, another incredibly complicated issue because of what the legislators did. There was a lot of excitement on this on the part of Senate Agriculture. It started to move. The feds then expanded the breakfast and lunch program through 21-22, which kind of, in a way, took the wind out of the sails of the urgency. But the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, started pulling bills apart and putting them together and getting things all kind of jumbled and confused. And our team, Dan's staff, but was led, Amy Schollenberger was the lead lobbyist on that. They persevered, and a whole bunch of critical issues did make it across the finish line. And S100, the start of all this, got a long way through the process. And given especially this one-year extension of the federal program, is in a really good position to make a really huge impact when we come back in 22 and it gets taken up again. So a lot of progress there on an issue that initially there was a hope that maybe it would move, but in fact, a whole bunch of it moved, and really important work done there. And I think, again, more to come. Farm to School and Early Childhood was originally in the S100 language, but then got dropped out in all of those, in all of the activity that I just described. They ended up with level funding, which is a disappointment, but they're part of the conversation. And so we hope to come back to that in 22. Last on this slide, Building Bright Futures funding. It turned out to be a really easy pitch. The legislature was very supportive. We were very lucky that the conversation started in House Human Services, where BBF staff, including Morgan Crossman, the executive director, have spent a lot of time. They know BBF's value. They were easily convinced to increase the funding for BBF, and that $261,000 increase in their state-based funding sailed through the legislature and is in the budget. So that's very good news for stabilizing BBF. Next slide. So a couple more issues here, and then we'll go to the summary slide and can open up for questions. So special accommodation grant funding, there was we understand that there's $300,000 for this in the budget. It's not called out. It's not segmented or segregated. That's a problem. We were pushing for an extra $200,000 and a specific line item for SAGs. Didn't happen. But we did get promises from the administration that it would be funded for FY22. We're going to watch this carefully to make sure that that actually happens. And we'll come back to this in 22 with our advocacy, I expect. I'm not sure where the program will end up. There are a lot of changes within CIS and, as we know, CDD, but we hope that the funding will in fact get there. It's not enough, but the program hopefully will be able to continue through the next fiscal year. And last is the pandemic response items, which is a whole nother huge world unto itself. Won't go through this list of sub points here. This was all the sub list were all the issues that were on were in S3 or H315, the sort of mini relief bill that went through. What's even more confusing is that the budget reallocated some funding so that some of the things that were in 315, the funding source for them got changed. The funding amount didn't get changed, but the source got changed, which adds to the confusion. Regardless, obviously, it's a huge amount of money going out the door for the programs that we support. A couple of things on this list are also mentioned in other slides. So if you're doing the math, you might end up with some double counting, but it felt important to put the whole list there. Two other things to mention briefly: specialized childcare DCF transportation. We worked really hard to try to shine a light on this really bad proposal by the administration to centralize transportation services throughout DCF. We were only partly successful, but we definitely slowed down, or at least, again, shone a really bright light on this. The legislature is extremely skeptical about the proposal to centralize these services. And we now have the grounds to come back to this in January because we expect that this is going to blow up in their face and it's not going to work. So there was a lot of skepticism. Senator Hardy was particularly skeptical, and there's going to be a report in November that's going to come back to the legislature on exactly what's going on. We'll be tracking this going throughout the spring, throughout the summer and fall, to find out what actually happens with the RFP for centralization and the aftermath of the department deciding what to do. The last thing is public engagement on federal funding allocations. This was a last minute victory way late in the session, in the budget process, that could be a really important thing. The Alliance is part of a group that's been working on a number of different issues in a holistic or big picture way, in terms of the state budget, in terms of how much funding we have to be able to support programs, our need to examine our tax policy and to increase funding so that all the needs of the various policy areas, not just social services and healthcare, but also environmental issues and economic development, all these different issues, infrastructure. We need more revenue to cover our needs. Part of that conversation is also that the needs and the voices of Vermonters are not included in these decisions. And so when the legislature at the end, when the budget conference committee started talking about doing a public engagement process to get feedback on what to do with the unspent pandemic relief funds, we were ready to offer language to the conferees that would shape this dialogue and move it in a direction that was more inclusive and would reach out to communities that had been marginalized and left out of the conversation over the past many years. And that language was offered to them and accepted. And so we expect that the legislature will have some kind of listening tour over the summer and fall. The language that is in the budget specifically calls out the need to reach out to marginalized communities, to use non-traditional ways of reaching out, and to have a report back so that there's a summary of the comments they hear from the public in these listening sessions, and there's a record of it that can be part of the discussion about budgeting and allocation decisions moving forward. So it means we're gonna have a big organizing project, an activation project over the summer and fall, once we find out exactly what's happening with that listening tour. But we're very pleased that we were able to get that language in. It was a joint effort. A number of organizations associated with the Alliance had a big role in that, including Voices for Vermont's Children, and our partners at Public Assets Institute, and Amy Schollenberger was also involved in those conversations, just to name the folks. So if you're interested in finding out more, you can talk to those folks about that effort. So Lorna, let's go to the last slide, which is the summary slide. So you can see there are a lot of items in significant successes because we had a lot of significant successes. And even those items that are listed as did not succeed or no action, there was in fact important discussion about those issues, just not directly connected with what was on our legislative agenda. So across the board, there really was a lot of activity. There was a lot of positives, very few negatives to talk about. It was a year of a great deal of impact by the Alliance partners and members and our coalitions, and we have a lot to celebrate. So let me stop there with my narrative. We have about 15 minutes or so for questions. So if people have questions, we can answer them. If people want to put that back up, we can. Oh, Lorna, I'm sorry. Would you please, do you have the ability to put the slides in the chat so people can download them if they'd like to do that? Great. So we will put the slides in the chat so that you can download them. Feel free to use them however you wish. You can even borrow the language if you like and use it on your own internal documents. Okay, so now I can see more of you. I can't get everyone on one screen, but if anyone has a question, please just go ahead and sing out. Or if I got something wrong, or if you want to expand on something. Come on. Someone has a question. So I'd like to hear more about public engagement funding, says Scott. So it isn't so much about the funding, although they did put that there's $40,000 in the budget to pay for a consultant and other sorts of infrastructure that might be necessary to do this listening tour. But I gotta tell you, the listening tour details, we don't know. We just don't have any details yet on what's gonna happen there. We do know sort of the inside baseball part of this. We do know that the speaker and the pro tem have very specifically attached themselves to this effort. Their names are associated with it. They talk about it a lot, or their names came up during the discussions of it. And it's interesting that it's not the committees of jurisdiction, it's leadership. Some speculate that's because of their political aspirations, but it also may be because this is an issue that is of interest to the entire General Assembly, and they want to make sure that they're engaged in a very significant way. The money we're talking about, Scott, is the federal funding that has not been allocated. So about half of the general funds, of the unrestricted funds, Amy asked, correct me if I'm wrong, roughly half of the unrestricted funds that the state has received have not been allocated yet at all. So that's all up for grabs. There is an outline of that in the budget, but it's basically it's up for grabs. The governor has said there's some things that he wants to do. The legislature talks about some things they want to do. And then there's also the potential for allocation of additional funds if there's an infrastructure bill. And there's a chance that things will be moved around because the initial allocations prove to be unnecessary. And I'd even add, there's a chance, given what's happening in DC, that some of this money might get actually pulled back. I don't know how they do that, but there's some discussion about using the money given to states that isn't necessary to pull it back to pay for the president's infrastructure package. So that's all, Scott, what's going to be on the menu of things to talk about during this listening tour. Okay, next question from Betsy, I see in the chat. Paid family leave will be federal ? That's the question, Betsy. And so the folks who are working on that, the coalition that's working on that is trying to stay engaged, stay connected. Morgan Nichols, you can see on your array, she's the head of that coalition along with the folks at Voices. So they're trying to stay connected with the federal delegation, stay on our toes. It might be that we need to fill in from federal action because that federal action isn't comprehensive, or maybe the federal action never happens. Well, we're sort of on standby, organizing, but on standby to see what happens on the federal level. Okay, next thing I see in the chat is Cassie's asking, of the wins, which would you say was the hardest fought or the most challenging to push through? Oh, Cassie, I love all my children equally. You know that. Don't ask me that. It's hard to say. I mean, the effort that LGK is leading, along with Vermont AAYC and all the rest of us on childcare. I mean, that's such a long road, right? You have to put that on that kind of a list. You'd have to put CIS on that kind of a list because we've been at it for so long. You could also point to, for instance, all the work on food security and nutrition. That took such an enormous coalition and collaborative effort behind the scenes because of what the legislature was doing of mixing and matching. I'm doing some reports that I'm going to send off to funders. and that's on the list. I see Keely and Betsy on my screen now. I mean, they work so hard and so long to deal with the ups and downs. It wasn't that the policy was hard to get support for, it's that the process was challenging to navigate, right? There was, and then at the end, there was this question of why are we doing universal? Like we got to the whole bedrock of why are we doing this in the first place, right? So that got kind of tricky. I think I'm going to stop there, Cassie, because I don't want to go farther into the favoritism thing. Okay.
You have a hand raise in Betsy. Betsy, feel free to come off mute.
Yep.
Thanks, Matt, great summary. I also just wanted to mention that part of that complicated universal meals farm to early childhood grants program was a local purchasing incentive that at this point is just for pre-K-12 schools, but it does give added reimbursement to the school nutrition programs for using a certain benchmark of Vermont food, which is, fresh, scratch cooking mostly. So we were very excited about that piece moving through out of that package as well.
Right, and this is an example of how we
Matt, we lost you.
Sorry, Matt, you've just slipped onto mute there.
sorry. So this is an example of how we have to be flexible here in our work, right? We have our plans. We think we know what's going to happen in October, November, and then the legislature starts and they do their work. And sometimes it's issues that we didn't really plan for get thrown into the mix, or things get combined. So the purchasing issue was not part of our legislative agenda, but then when things started getting knitted together, it became sort of along, we were all along for the ride together, and we needed to be flexible with that. And that's part of the collaborative nature that we try to build, so that when that happens, we know each other, we can talk to each other, and we can work through those challenges. Do you want to recognize that Representative Teresa Wood, Vice Chair of the House Human Services Committee, has joined us. Thank you, Representative Wood. We'll be hearing from her later on the panel. Other questions that people, okay. Ann Dillenbeck, are legislators open to using new federal funds to address ongoing under-resourcing? The short answer is no. But I offer that short answer with, as the legislator said to me the other day, I offer that with love. Like it's that the legislature has been very consistent in saying that base funding needs to be used for continuing needs, and every way we can, one-time funding will be used for needs that have a clear horizon and will disappear. Now, there aren't very many things that are like that. Housing, the housing infrastructure piece is like that in a way. I mean, you still have to pay for upkeep and so on, but building housing or renovating housing is one time. The IT issues are one time, right? Organizations that could point to spikes in need because of the pandemic, food bank, right? That can be one time. And we're as creative as we can to consider as much as possible one time. And, but no, we generally are not successful when we attempt to say, well, so we have 3 years of funding. Can we just fix this for 3 years? And then we'll just see what happens. That generally does not work. So occasionally it does. And so there's always exceptions to the rule, but it's better to start with the idea that that's not an avenue to pursue, which actually I'll point out that gets really complicated because as the folks at LGK can expand on, there were some folks at the federal government who were saying, spend all of your childcare money and expand benefits now so that you show how important it is. And that will help build the case for more federal money for this long term, which, that's a strategy, sure, except our legislature doesn't want to do that. So we have to be flexible, and there isn't an absolute answer for anything, but in general, no. Yes, as Teresa says, Some of the childcare stuff is being stretched a little bit to try to see what we can do. All right, other questions? We aren't due back till 2:45, people. There's plenty of time.
Matt, this is Lee Lauber. I am just wondering if you or others can provide a little more information about what you know about DCF's plans to have real stakeholder input into the federal child care infusion.
I know a little bit, but I think Sarah Kay knows a lot more about this than I do, and will get it straight the first time. So Sarah, if you'd be willing to step in and answer that question for me, I would appreciate it.
Sure, although I cannot promise that I will get it right the first time, but yes, the legislation requires that CBD, DCF work with Building Bright Futures and stakeholders to develop recommendations related to the American Rescue Plan Act dollars. And so BBF is right now, I believe, working to figure out how to best utilize the existing early childhood action plan committees. So a lot of us are at a lot of those tables to be able to support that conversation. I have not been part of those conversations, but I do know that that BBF has been talking to Interim Deputy Commissioner Miranda Gray, who I think is really genuinely interested in making sure that feedback is a part of those, that proposals are discussed in consultation with folks. I see Janet from Vermont AUIC has her hand up. I think she may have been a part of some of those conversations and can maybe provide some more intel on what the plans are too.
Sorry, my dog chose this moment to start barking. Sorry. Sorry, not professional of me, but that is our Zoom life right now. Yes, Miranda did pull together leadership from Vermont AUIC, LGK, BBF, and Vermont After School to begin to have the conversation about what the process for gathering input should be. And there was this discussion about surveys, focus groups based off of survey results, actually doing some paid focus groups with families. So they're thinking hard about how to set it up, recognizing also that people are probably kind of surveyed out right now. So it's just this balance between how do we get a representative, is there a way to get representative feedback without overburdening everybody? So it's definitely in the works, and I think they're being trying to be thoughtful about that, but I don't think there's like news to share yet. So apologies about my dog.
One of the process points here to point out is that unlike last summer and fall, this summer and fall is the middle of the biennium, right? So the legislature is adjourned, but not ended. Legislators are in the middle of their term. There will be more of the summer study committees and other oversight committees that are ongoing. Some of them will actually be meeting in person. That'll be interesting for all of us to transition to that. It means that we'll have more opportunity to talk to each other and to talk to legislators. And so what I would say to everyone about this issue and really all the others is keep the information coming, right? Let us know what you hear. Just yesterday, I don't know if the person's here, I won't name them, but we had some rumors circulating about a program, and I said, just keep the rumors coming. Like, let us know what you're hearing. It's important for us to hear what's going on out there, whether it's fact-based or just speculation. So, or if it's frustration, right? So let us know, and we'll try to take advantage of the times when we are interacting with each other over the summer and fall to talk more about that. Sarah is noting that Morgan is able to join us. There she is. She just popped into my array. Morgan, do you want to give us more background about what's happening? The question, I don't know if you heard the question. Did you hear the question? Okay, so the question was, what about the spending of the federal money? What's DCF doing on stakeholder engagement for getting feedback about how to use the federal pandemic relief funding?
Great question. So we spent some time on the Monday State Advisory Council doing some initial data gathering and used idea boards to capture some of that information for them. But they are also working with a range of other partners to design additional stakeholder engagement, recognizing that the State Advisory Council is really high level partners that are coming together, and we're not capturing childcare providers or educators and other partners that really do need to be involved, nor do we have a diverse both demographically, but also regional variation at the State Advisory Council. And we do engage through our regional council networks to get some of that feedback. So I would anticipate in the next couple of weeks hearing from DCF and CDD more specifically about additional plans for stakeholder feedback. That is also true from the Agency of Education. So they have to create a state plan for how ESSER dollars are used. They have to have a very clear process documented by which they have equitable access to be able to contribute feedback on that plan. And so we will help support that initiative, but I think that agency leadership are recognizing that they do need to have a much stronger process for how they involve early childhood stakeholders in the process of decision-making around federal funds.
So there's going to be a lot of processes floating around, a lot of them. So everyone needs to stay in touch, right? Because it'll be interesting to compare them to each other and see how some are working better than others and so on. I want to acknowledge, just as I'm looking around the array, we don't really have time to go around and introduce everyone. And so I just acknowledge that for people who are not as familiar with the names and the faces and the acronyms, I apologize if you don't know necessarily who's talking or what their role is. We don't have a good way of overcoming that, really. So I just apologize. Morgan's putting her idea. Actually, that's probably a good way of doing it, Morgan. Right. So, and Lorna, you might use that for your clients in the future when we're doing this kind of thing. Not that we'll be doing Zoom forever, but you could put who you are. Don't everyone put their names in the chat. Then it's just too much. That's too much. But if you care to put your organizational identification, if you're speaking, you could do that. Thank you, Morgan. Okay, we've got, as you all saw the warning, we just got a few minutes left. Are there any further questions that people have? Linda January, so your hand is up.
Yeah, there's a CDD sent out an email about a week or so ago around a stakeholder public hearing about the Child Care and Development Fund. Is that just their general, that's not about the COVID money, that's just their kind of general plan, right?
Correct. That's the CCDF state plan. Yep. So that was just the initial process. That's not even the full feedback process by which people are giving that feedback. That was just the initial round that happened last week.
Okay.
Yep.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to double check.
Right. Like I
There's
said,
another public hearing next week about it too.
Right. The irony is that people are going to say there are too many meetings, there's too much opportunity for feedback. And then in 6 weeks, they're going to complain that no one asked their opinion about anything. But yes, and as with all these things, reach out to the statewide organizations that you're a part of, because they're probably submitting comments or can give you some background information or guide your engagement so that you can pick the meeting that's most helpful for you and make the most of your time to contribute. All right. Other questions that people might have? Looking to see if anyone has their hand raised. Okay, so I'll take this opportunity to remind everyone, the steering committee is going to talk about it in our meeting, which is right after the annual meeting, that it's not too early to start thinking about what your legislative agenda initiatives might be for 22. A lot of these issues will carry forward. We haven't really resolved any of them. So over the summer, Dan and I are available to work with you and your organizations on what your plans are for advocacy and for the 22 session. and to start reaching out and building coalitions and reaching out to legislators and so on and so forth. So you can keep that in mind as you think about advocacy going forward. There's also going to be quite a bit of activity over the summer. Again, there are a lot of these different meetings that provide opportunities for feedback and for stakeholder engagement. There's going to be, as I mentioned, the listening tour. I know that several organizations have field campaigns in the works or operational already. I know LGK is working on a whole set of outreach activities. And Morgan Nichols at Main Street Alliance is working on story gathering for the family leave issue. So there's a lot of things going on. Just looking in the chat, I think we wait for all of us to talk a few ways to get impacted people's faces. Right. As Amy Brady's pointing out in the chat, one of the challenges here is that we're trying to reach out to folks who have been marginalized or who have not been engaged or who otherwise are finding it difficult to have their voices be heard. So that's part of what Dan's going to be working on as part of his work plan for the summer and fall. He looks forward to working with a lot of you on those outreach efforts, which we really need to put more energy into. Okay. Lorna's giving me the thumbs up. Looks like we're all set. So we're going to go. So I think everyone's coming back to us, right, Lorna? Right. So we didn't go to a breakout room, so other people will join us. So why don't we, I'll stop talking. We'll take just a quick little 1 or 2 minutes of me not talking. People can stand up, take a stretch break, and then just a couple minutes, we'll start the business meeting. So thanks, everyone. We did not hire a musical guest this year.
I was just thinking some nice classical or some smooth jazz would have been good there. Great to see those of you who are in Dan's breakout room back. If there was anything that you want to pick up from Dan's room that you didn't quite get to finish off, didn't get to round out, please do pop it in the chat so we can review that at the end and make sure that we pick up with any comments or questions or issues. I don't want anybody to have anything left unsaid when they walk away from the session today. So with that said, everybody has come back and landed. Dan is here. So Matt, Dan, I'll hand it over to you for the business portion of today.
Great. Thanks again. Thanks to Lorna for being our tech person. As you may notice, she comes from Eastern Vermont, as it were, very far east, but time is no issue. Yes. So thanks everyone for coming to our annual meeting. It's great to gather, even if we have to gather this way. As I said before, when I was talking, it's been a strange year, and it will continue to be a strange year as we transition back to in-person meetings, back to driving around, back to seeing each other face to face. A lot of transitions. So there's a lot going on in the world that's really sobering. Yesterday's anniversary, of course. Also, we do not have a formal land acknowledgement in our agenda today, but it is something that we talked about in our recent DEI workshop, our monthly salon, that I'd encourage folks to join. They're great conversations. I'd encourage everyone to take their own time and space to consider the fact that we are on land that is land that was taken from those who lived in this area before many of us arrived, and there's a difficult history that we all need to engage and think about and take action to try to respond to in our own ways. So I'd ask you to just ponder that. So it's been a really exciting year for the Alliance. We accomplished a great deal during the legislative session. I've been working on writing reports over the last week or two for our funders and for the summary that you all saw in our weekly newsletter and other places. And there's a lot of great news. There's a lot of incredible accomplishments to celebrate. We don't at this meeting spend a lot of time going over the results. That's why we had the workshop at the beginning. This is more of a business meeting and to look ahead to next year. But there is a lot that we accomplished, and so much of it was accomplished because of the way we work together, because of the way that we communicate and collaborate, and the special relationships that we've developed over the years and the new ones that we've developed with folks who are just coming into the coalition, whether it is an individual staff person or as an organization. And we're going to keep working in that way in the future. We have a lot of work left to do, and we have a really great foundation to work from. And then I think it's going to be an exciting year in 22. We have a lot of transitions to get through this summer. As folks know, Amy is on leave, so Dan's filling in. So we're a little short-staffed, and other organizations are having similar changes within their organizations. So there's going to be, I think, a summer of reassessment and reconnection. But I think we have a lot of exciting work to do as we look ahead to 22. So we're going to go ahead and do the business portion of the meeting now. This is something that is required by our governance document and is part of our renewal every year to make sure that the steering committee is elected and that we have all of our internal processes in order. So first thing I want to do is approve the minutes. We do actions generally by consensus. So Lorna or Dan has posted the notes in the chat, so you can see there where that is available for everyone. So if no one has any objection, we will consider the minutes approved from last meeting. I'll pause a moment. Lorna, you are now spotlit, just so you know, on my screen. So if anyone has any objections to approving the minutes, they should take themselves off mute and speak out. Okay, not hearing any, we'll consider those approved by consensus. So now I'm going to go through and introduce the steering committee members so they can just briefly say hello to folks. This is a lot easier when we're in a room and people can just stand up and say hello. So this is the equivalent of standing up and saying hello. So we're going to try to make the tech work. I'm going to read people's names, and Lorna, who's now spotlit, is going to swap out her face for the people who I name out. So fingers crossed that the tech works. Here we go. So Margaret Atkinson, who is the chair, who represents Winston Prouty. So Lorna, are you swapping in?
Hello.
There she is. All right, there's a slight delay. There she is. So Margaret, wave to everyone. Wave. Yep. There's Margaret. Okay, so next, the vice chair is Faye Mack, who is going out on leave, but she represents Hunger Free Vermont, and Keely Agan is here representing Hunger Free.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you.
Tabitha McGlynn is our secretary. She's representing herself. She's an individual member. Lorna, do we have Tabitha? We do. There's a delay while the electron.
I've got a Tabitha wave.
Oh, okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi.
There she is. The treasurer representing the loan fund, our parent organization, is Barbara Petrie.
Hello, everyone.
There we go. Just a quick note while we're pausing on Barbara. So the Alliance is a program of the Vermont Community Loan Fund, our parent organization. And if anyone wants to find out more about them, we're always happy to talk about their great work providing financial instruments and support to organizations that have trouble accessing traditional forms of capital. And the at-large member of the executive committee is Diane Nichols Fleming, individual member.
I don't see Diane, so if you're there, Diane, please do unmute, but I don't see you by name.
All right. So now I'm going to go through and the rest of the steering committee members. So Ann Dillenbeck, individual member.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you.
Ellen Drolet, individual member.
Hello.
There she is from her childcare program. Representing the Vermont Head Start Association, Deb Gass.
Hi, everybody. lovely afternoon for a good cause here, a good meeting.
And representing Let's Grow Kids, Sarah Kenny.
Everyone.
Representing the Vermont Family Network, Pam McCarthy.
Hi, everybody.
Representing Vermont After School, Cassie Wilner.
Hello.
There's Cassie. Parent Child Center Network, Floyd Neese. I know Floyd's there because he texted me. Lorna, do we have Floyd?
In the room, but not unmuting at the moment.
Okay, very good. Floyd's tying fishing lures at the moment. Main Street Alliance, Morgan Nichols.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
Emerson Falls Play Care, Judy Pransky. Judy still with us? She was saying that she might have to go.
I'm still with you and
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here.
Great.
I had to come and go a couple of times, but I'm here and I'm happy.
Good. Good to see you, Judy. Vermont AUIC, Janet McLaughlin.
Good afternoon. I think the dogs stopped barking. Nice to
Excellent.
be with you.
Good timing. Voices for Vermont's Children, Sarah Teal.
Hi, everyone.
An individual member, Joanna Von Kuhlen.
Hello, everyone. Great to see y'all.
And I think that is everyone. There are other steering committee members who could not join us. Mary Zentera is an individual member, and the Vermont Food Bank, I don't believe there's anyone from the food bank here today. So thanks for bearing with us as we go through that. All right, so the next thing is to do our elections. So Lorna, if we can go back to, that's it, there we go. So thank you. All right, so our governance structure, just a quick reminder of that. So there are 21 members of the steering committee. They're staggered so that half of the elections are each year. So what you see in front of you is the list of steering committee members, as it says at the top, positions not up for election. So in our elections, you have to be a member of good standing to vote. So that could mean that if you are an individual member and you are the representing an organization, you could potentially get 2 votes, or it might mean that there are several people from the organization here, in which case you don't get each vote, you only get 1 vote for your organization. So we do have processes in place to handle actual voting if we need to do voting. Lorna, do we have anyone who's called in on a phone? No, okay. We also have a polling activity that we could do if we need to have an election. I will note that we have not had competitive elections in the past, but if we need to have one, we have the capacity to do so. So these are the folks who are on the organizations who are on the steering committee who are not up for election. Dan, if we could roll to the next slide. So these are the seats that are up for election this year. Now, just to clarify, you can be an individual member or an organizational member. So for instance, just to use the one that's on the screen here. So the after school designated seat, Vermont After School is the organization that's on the steering committee. They have an individual person, an actual human being that they identify as their person who represents them, but the seat is held by Vermont After School. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and ask for nominations for each of these seats. Dan is going to be our scribe in terms of writing in the names here. And our secretary is going to be the one who, Tabitha is going to be the one who's going to record who makes the nominations. We don't need a second, and we don't need speeches. But we're going to get through all the nominations and see where we are, and perhaps we might have folks give just a brief comments if they're new or if they like to introduce themselves. So,
Matt, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Since the one of the safety seats is vacant, can someone fill that seat like during the year? Or can you only fill a seat if you're elected on the right schedule?
Right. So we do, thank you. Could you go back one slide, Dan? Okay, so you see the second to last slot there at the bottom, the safety seat where it says vacant. So there is a vacancy on our steering committee. If someone would like to be considered for that, those vacancies are filled by the chair. So if someone is interested in filling that seat, I was going to mention this later, Ann, but thank you for reminding me. So if someone's interested in acting in that capacity on the steering committee for the safety position, then they should get in touch with me, and I will be more than happy to forward their name to the steering committee chair. We'll elect that position in the steering committee meeting that's going to happen right after the annual meeting, and the steering committee can handle that in the summer and fall. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the process. And so what I will ask is I'm going to go through each of these seats that we have listed here. We do the ones that have a policy designation first, and then see if we have any contested elections, and then we'll handle those, and then we do the at-large ones in a separate process. Same process, but just separated from the other one. And that's so that if we were to have a contested election and someone were to lose, they would have an opportunity to run for the at-large seat. Linda Johnson's asking, what does safety refer to? And Ann has replied in the chat, yes, I would agree, Ann. All aspects of safety for young children, families, and communities. It's not specifically defined in our governance document. Okay, so for the early care and early education after school seat, would someone like to nominate a member to serve in that seat on the steering committee? You have to unmute yourself and speak up. Or you can put it in the chat if you prefer.
I forget, Matt. If I can nominate ourselves, Vermont After School.
Great. So Cassie is nominating, and nominating yourself is totally fine. So Cassie Wilner is, on behalf of After School, is nominating Vermont After School for that seat, with Cassie, you as the person representing the organization on the steering committee, correct?
Perfect.
Right. Okay. Any other nominations for that seat? All right. So next is early care, early education center-based. Is there a nominee for that position? Again, feel free to nominate yourself.
Okay, I nominate Judy Pransky. I like her a lot.
But Judy Emerson Falls Play Care with.
All
Judy
right, I know.
Pransky,
I'm saying
right?
Emerson Falls Play Care.
Right.
Yes. And I'll be
All
the
right.
designated person.
There you go. Now you're getting it.
I was going to nominate you, Judy, but
Who was that?
Floyd.
Oh, Floyd, thank you so much. I was waiting and I didn't hear anybody nominating me.
Tabitha's notes will indicate that Judy Pransky nominated Emerson Falls Play Care. All right. So economic security.
This is Sarah Teal, Voices for Vermont's Children, and I would like to nominate Sandra Cross as an individual member in this slot.
Nice.
Great. Sandra, maybe since you're a new name for folks, maybe once we get to the end of the list, we'll come back and give you a chance to say hello to people. Great. Family support.
In the absence of no other voice, I nominate myself.
Well, is it the Parent-Child Network?
Yes,
With you as the individual representing them?
that will do. Thank you.
There you go. Any other nominations? Food security.
This is Keely Agan, and I would like to nominate Hunger Free Vermont with Faye Mack as the representative.
Great. Any other nominations there? Okay, health.
This is Ann Dillenbeck. I'd like to nominate Vermont Family Network with Pam McCarthy as the representative.
Great. Any other nominations? I would note that when we're in person, we have a massive tech issue of trying to figure out how to do this. On screen, it's much easier because you can all see it. So some of you may remember we pass out like empty grids and you can write it in at your tables. And we've tried all different ways of doing this. This is the one thing that Zoom is much better for, because it's actually really hard to get a massive video screen where everyone can see in a meeting room. This is easier. Okay, parents.
This is Joanna Von Kuhlen, and if Mary Zantara is still interested, I would nominate her.
Yes, I did hear from Mary, so that's an individual member. I did hear from Mary earlier today. She had a family emergency come up and she was not able to be here, but she did tell me she was interested in continuing to serve on the steering committee. All right, and the last one in this round, safety.
I would like to nominate Ann Dillenbeck.
You do it first.
Okay. I'd like to nominate Ann Dillenbeck because I just want to be in the safety of her arms.
Oh, cutie.
I know.
She's so much more eloquent than I would have been.
Lyrical nominations from Judy Pransky. All right. Very good. Are there any other nominations? Okay. So what we'll do is once I want to give Sandra a chance to say hello to people, since she's a new name for, I think, just about everyone, most of us anyway. I have not had a chance to meet her in person yet, I don't believe. And then what we'll do is someone can make a motion to elect all of these nominees by a single vote. But before we do that, Lorna, perhaps you could help us by, Sandra, would you like to say a few words?
I don't really know what to say, but hi, everybody. I don't know if everyone saw my video with Vermont Legal Aid about my struggle with, I was on Reach Up and paying for housing, and I kind of dug out of there. So I have some personal history with this, and I'm excited. That's all I got.
That's great.
Welcome.
And thank you, Sarah.
Well, you have lots of friends to reach out to for folks who can help you out as you make the transition to being on the steering committee. All right, so if we can go back to the big slide. Great. Excellent. So would someone like to make a motion that we elect the nominees by a single vote?
Yeah, I'll make that motion that we elect the slates by a single vote.
Great.
And
is there a
second. Second.
Who is that? Judy Pransky?
Yes, it is.
Great. So we generally do all of our business by consensus except for elections. This is the only thing where we actually do motions and seconds, if you're wondering about the process. Okay, so I will do it this way. All in favor, either say aye or wave your hand or give a thumbs up or do some other kind of action that indicates positiveness.
Aye.
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 Are there any opposed? Please take yourself off mute and say nay in the spirit of the House Appropriations Committee. Okay, great, unanimous. All those folks are elected. Congratulations. Don't forget, there's a steering committee meeting immediately following the annual meeting. All right, so now for the at-large seats, we have two at-large. There are three total, two this year, one next year. For the first at-large seat.
This is
a motion. Oh,
I would like to nominate Sarah Kenny as the representative for Let's Grow Kids for this seat.
All right, very good. And is there another nomination for the second seat?
I'd like to nominate Vermont AUIC with Janet McLaughlin as the member.
Great. Sarah Kenny nominating. Excellent. Are there any other nominations? Okay. Would someone like to make a motion that we accept these nominees with a single vote?
I'll make that motion. It's Morgan.
Great. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
I'll second. Oh.
Was that Joanna?
Yes, I'll
Great.
second.
Very good. All right. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, great. Thank you, everyone, for that. I think, Lorna, we're back to me being spotlit. If you could do that, that would be great. Thanks. So just looking at my notes here, sorry for my paper tapping. So I'll note that again, the steering committee is going to meet directly after the meeting to do a brief business meeting that will include setting up the officers and talking about the legislative agenda setting process for the 22 legislative agenda. I do want to thank our outgoing members of the steering committee. At this point, I think it's really one organization, Umbrella Inc., and Amanda Cochran was their representative. I want to thank Umbrella for their years of service on the steering committee. Really appreciate all of their work. I think that concludes most of the business that we have. Dan, I think I'm going to pass it off to you to talk about feedback and the governance document.
Thanks, Matt. Yes, so I will, I've just posted in the chat a link to the Alliance governance document that you all should feel free to take a look at, offer some feedback upon. As a membership organization, we exist to serve our members. So please feel free to take a look at that governance document, make any suggestions or ask questions. If you have any questions about the consensus process or the legislative agenda setting process, please look at that. Just a reminder, there will be I will send a survey out after this meeting for your reflections on the virtual meeting. So I would encourage you to keep an eye out for that and get that back to us. But now I will be passing it back to Margaret Atkinson, who will be introducing Representative Peter Welch, who has joined us.
Thanks, Dan. Representative Peter Welch was first elected to the U.S. Congress in 2006, following a long career in the Vermont State Senate, where he served 2 terms as the Senate pro tem, President pro tem. Representative Welch is the Chief Deputy Whip of the House Democratic Caucus and a member of the Democratic Steering and Policy Committee. He serves on the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, and the House Committee on Oversight and Reform. And we really appreciate that Representative Welch has made time today on his schedule to update us on the status of federal pandemic response initiatives and the President's infrastructure investment proposals. Welcome, Representative Welch.
Hi, this is Brooke Grams here. I am a staff person for Rep. Welch, and he will actually just be joining us in a moment here.
Representative Welch, can I just check that you can hear us?
Yes, testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3.
Wonderful. We've got you loud and clear. Thank you so much for joining us.
Representative Welch, we were ahead of schedule and you missed the glowing introduction that Margaret Atkinson did of you. So apologies that we are ahead, but now we're all set and ready to hear your comments. Thanks for joining.
That's great. That's great. Well, it's wonderful to be with you. I'm really bummed that I missed my wonderful introduction, but thank you. And it saved me from being embarrassed hearing nice things about me. But I want to say some nice things about you. I am so excited about how there has become an awareness in Washington, you know, not universal, but awareness in Washington, that when we're talking about the infrastructure of American life, it absolutely has to include families. And of course, that's the big debate we're having about infrastructure. But what we saw with COVID and that initial response, and this was only 15 months ago, that I was coming home from Washington. And when I got home, we were in a state of emergency and everybody was shut down. And we did pass that original COVID relief package on a bipartisan basis. And the situation was so dire and so extreme that what had in the past been debates about whether the federal government should be doing more to support childcare became accepted. And it was just so clear that the only way that we were going to have any chance of helping us get through this, and that's true whether you were a family living in a Trump district or you were in a Biden district, was to provide support for families. And that obviously included very significant childcare. We can't move on without it. And even now, as we're trying to get our economy back, and we're on the way, one of the documented huge challenges for women continuing to participate in the labor force is to have quality, accessible, affordable childcare. And I'm saying this to a group of people who have been championing this for years and years. And your advocacy has really made a difference. Now in Washington, we're on this point where when we are talking about this infrastructure bill that President Biden is proposing, that we want to have significant funding for childcare, for 2 years of pre-K education, as well as 2 years of post-secondary education. And we also had in the package that we passed, by the skin of our teeth, the child care tax credit that is going to, as you know, be a huge difference for families. Any child 5 and under, that family will be getting $300 a month, to $3,600 a year. 6 to 17, it's $250 a month. And economists say that that should reduce childhood poverty by 50%. So we are on the cusp here of making a decision as a country that incorporates the advocacy for childcare that you have been pushing and promoting and fighting for so long. And in fact, in the infrastructure bill that the president has proposed, there'd be $25 billion to pay for the creation of new child care facilities. And what you've also been advocating is that if child care is that important, it's important to pay child care workers good wages. So I want to say to you, thank you. And we've got a fight on our hands to keep going. But what we've seen is that absent the kind of really social insurance program that many of our competitor countries have, then we're leaving our families high and dry, and we're leaving children in a very, very, very vulnerable situation. So I thank each and every one of you for all that you've done. And I'm so excited to be part of a congressional delegation with Bernie and Patrick, where we're all in on helping get past this infrastructure bill that will give a significant boost to childcare in the United States. And we all support as well having that child care tax credit be made permanent. So thank you very much for this opportunity to be with you. And thank you again for all that you're doing. It's really, really important for Vermont families and for Vermont kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Welch. I know your staff has let us know that you have a tight schedule today, so we don't have time for questions, but I know folks are reaching out to your office and to your staff with concerns about a number of different issues, so we'll continue to stay in touch with you in the weeks and months ahead.
Yeah, we're here. We want to work with you hand in glove. So thank you, Matt. Bye-bye, everybody.
Great. Thanks so much, Congressman.
Bye-bye.
All right. Looks like the storms haven't gotten down his way yet. It's pouring here in Washington County. Great. Well, it's good to hear from Representative Welch, and we're going to transition to talking with members of the state legislature now. I do want to note, just so that it's captured in the minutes, we do have a quorum. So we have more than 20 members here. So we do have a quorum that makes all of our activities official according to our governance document. So that's important to note. All right. So we're going to transition now to our panel. And we put this together thinking that by the time we got to this point, there would still be a lot of unanswered questions about what was happening with the federal funding. And I think it was a good guess on our part that even though the legislative session, when we were planning this meeting, we'd hoped that the legislative session would be over, but there would still be lingering questions and a question of what we can do as a community to stay engaged. So in our session, in the workshop, we talked about the engagement process that DCF and others are going to be having for how to spend the federal money. And that's really, that's endemic of a lot of questions that we have as a community about how things are going to proceed and what we can do as advocates to stay engaged with the legislature through the summer and fall as they continue to ponder this. There may be a legislative session, a special session in October, but regardless, when they come back in January, there's going to be a lot of discussions about federal funding. And we want to have talked to our legislators before then, not try to ramp up our conversations in January. So with that in mind, I'm really pleased to welcome three very important legislators to our meeting. So Lorna, if you could help arrange the towels so we bring them in. So we have as our panel today, we have about half an hour for our discussion, then we're going to break out into breakout rooms afterwards to have some discussion amongst ourselves. So Senator Ginny Lyons from Chittenden County, who is chair of the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. Representative Teresa Wood from the Washington Chittenden District, who is the vice chair of the House Human Services Committee. And Representative Kimberly Jessup from the Washington 5 District, who is the ranking member of the House Appropriations Committee. So pleased to have them here. We're going to get the tiles arranged so that we can see them all together. And then I will ask them a series of questions to give them each some time to answer them. So Lorna, go ahead and fire up the array and let's get started.
We are done and ready to go.
Okay. I'll ask each of you in order. For the first question, we'll go with Senator Lyons and then Representative Wood and then Representative Jessup. The first question is if you could share your thoughts on the process that's been used so far to allocate the ARPA funds. What's happened in your committee and in your chamber and in the legislature generally. So Senator Lyons.
And Matt, so thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I do have thunder coming, so I don't guarantee that the internet will stay stable, but I'm here for now. You know, it's interesting that you asked this question because this year has been a really important transition to a very collaborative process between the House, the Senate, and then in the Senate, along with our Appropriations Committee. We, and obviously our Joint Fiscal Office, one of the issues that we confront with federal dollars is what are the guidelines? And so the first question we ask about the money is how are we allowed to spend it? But more importantly, we look at what the needs are. And so we have worked very hard to understand childcare needs in our state. And obviously H-171 has taken us light years, as well as some of the work on parent-child centers and other areas. So understanding what the needs are and then laying those out for the Appropriations Committee. So building a policy position based on our values and sharing that with our approps folks. And certainly Senator Kitchell and I have had a long history of working well together. So understanding, so then you can see putting everything together, understanding what the needs are, what our priorities are, and then how we're allowed to use the money. And as you know, right in the middle of finalizing H-171 and finalizing the budget, we learned that we couldn't use the stabilization funds or direct their how those would be used. So we had to change language at the last minute. But that's kind of the broad stroke overview. We cannot do it without the people who are here today. And I mean that both from the legislative perspective, so Representative Wood, Representative Jessup, but most importantly, all of you who are so fully engaged, boots on the ground with childcare. And as we go forward, it is going to be absolutely critical that your feedback help us understand what have we done that has helped and what needs to happen further. So that's the broad brush.
Right. And as you said, one of the things that happened that was so important, that in the middle of your process, the rules changed. And I think we'll get to that in my last question as I talk about looking forward. So I'd ask you to keep that in mind when you answer a future question. What's going to happen when the rules change again? Because they certainly will. So Representative Wood, your reflections on the process used so far to allocate ARPA funds?
Thank you, Matt, and thank you everyone who is on the call this afternoon. It's great to be with you here. As Senator Lyons spoke to, literally, I don't know, at the 171, the child care bill, we amended it and draft amended it 3 or 4 times at the very end between our two bodies, and trying to make sure that the language would meet what it is that we needed to do, while still remaining flexible enough to take into consideration the input that would be received from the community as this process unfolds. So I think that's one of the key elements that the legislature wanted to ensure, is that there was community stakeholder input, and that this was not an administration only prioritization of how the funds were spent, but that it included the people who are going to be most impacted. So it includes families, it includes those people who provide the care, it includes advocates, it includes legislators in that mix, all the people here in this room. We wanted to ensure that there was a really valid community input process. And so that was one of the very key things to us as we looked at finalizing that last piece of the bill. So as Senator Lyons said, it is likely that as we learn more, by the time we're back in January and perhaps before in the Joint Fiscal Committee, we will see tweaks to the things that we will need to do. And certainly we have an unprecedented amount of resources going into the childcare arena right now. And if some version of the family rescue plan comes into play, that will even be broader. And so in your first, when I was in your breakout session and you spoke to or someone asked the question about whether these current federal relief dollars be looked at for long-term needs. Really what we're trying to do in the childcare area is to set ourselves up so that we can make transformational investments for the future. And so we really looking to that input process to have that happen.
That's great. A lot of things for us to talk about in future questions and back and forth. I want to turn though first to Representative Jessup. You're in the nuts and bolts committee, right? The first two folks are on policy committees. Representative Jessup was not just on the appropriations committee, but was one of the conferees. So she was right there at the table right until the end. Can you give us an inside view from the appropriations committee perspective about the process used to allocate the ARPA funds?
Great. Well, thank you everyone for all of your work and for hosting this today. I think actually Senator Lyons and Rep Wood set the stage really well. Those same elements that were happening outside the committee of conference certainly played in. What was happening in terms of the rules when those came in, what sort of pivot had to happen. I think also what we worked hand in glove with our congressional delegation to try to sort those. And by we, I mean both the legislative branch and the executive branch. And then finally, there's also the same external stakeholder input going on as we go to conference, trying to make sure that we're hearing from folks inside the building as well as folks outside the building. And similar to the structure in H171, if you look at the budget, which is H439, you'll see in G as in goat, G200, there's a community engagement process. And it's exactly the thinking I'm sure you've already covered in talking about the childcare bill, which is we've spent roughly 1/2 of the ARPA funds coming in, and there will be what I call a listening tour going around the state, looking at all the other voices that should be weighing in as we move forward. And that's going to cover everything from broadband to housing, to clean water, to climate change. So that same process that's happening with H171 and stakeholder input is bedded within an even larger structure. So I think it will be important for folks who care about childcare to be a part not only of the H171 process, but also that larger conversation.
Right, so there are a lot of balls in the air. We were talking in our breakout group about how many different stakeholder engagement processes there will be. The education agency is going to be doing one, DCF will be doing one, there'll be this broad one across all policy areas for the legislature is doing. I want to shift though to a little bit more detailed look. Some of us are in your committee rooms all the time, but a lot of people here are not. So we'll start with Representative Wood. Can you give us a sense of your committee's role specifically in the process to give a flavor so that those who don't get to see you working through it, give us a sense of what it's like as you are working, and specifically on the federal money, if you could. Share some reflections, if you would. Thanks.
Well, some folks in the room have a sense of what our committee is like, and other folks don't. So I'll just briefly say that we are sort of like a detail committee. We like to get into the nitty gritty. We ask a lot of in-depth questions. And when we hear about stuff sort of like on the street, we prefer to hear about it, through the appropriate channels. So we definitely like to be involved at the ground level when it comes to thinking about some of these investments with the ARPA funds. And in the Department for Children and Families arena, they also have additional federal mandates that are happening right now in terms of a planning process that is actually sort of ongoing and into the future, that is under their regular planning process for federal funding. And ensuring that the legislature is a partner with the executive branch when it comes to some of these policies, I think is really critical to make sure that we're on the same page. So that helps us when we get to the situation that we're in now, where we have more federal dollars than any one of us has seen in our legislative careers coming in all at one time, to be able to sort of set the stage and agree on how we can prioritize those resources so that we're utilizing them in the best way possible. So we have the Department for Children and Families in on a regular basis, and I won't sugarcoat it. It's been a bit of a challenge this year because there's been a lot of personnel changes in the division, and there was a proposal put forth to disband the Child Development Division, and that has played into our discussions this year. So it's still a work in progress, I guess I would say, as we look to the next half of those funds being prioritized and how we spend those. I think that if we can answer some of the questions when it comes to the executive branch and what they see for a future of the Child Development Division, given the fact that we did not move the bill along in the House, and I don't think the Senate moved it either, I think frankly, we're sending a message that we're not going to move it. So I think that that's important for them to hear. And that will hopefully change the dialogue a little bit. And that's important.
Right. I want to acknowledge some of the comments in the chat that people are voicing their appreciation for all three of you for your work as champions on all the different issues that we're working on here. So I just want to echo that people are extremely appreciative of the kinds of relationships that you're talking about. All three of you have mentioned, and the collaboration and your support. And it means such a great deal to children and families throughout the state. So I want to make sure that we say thank you very explicitly. Representative Jessup.
I just wanted to say that I think that what you just said, Matt, is really critical. And you sort of alluded to this in the beginning, as did Senator Lyons. I mean, there has been very close contact among the policy committees in the House and the Senate, as well as with the appropriations committees, both in our own houses and then across the bodies. You know, I haven't been around as long as Senator Lyons has, but it certainly has been very beneficial, I think, to making sure that we are doing things in a coordinated and collaborative way. You might find this odd, but it is a difficult job to try to figure out how to effectively spend this amount of money so that it makes good investments for Vermont's future.
Right. So with that in mind, Representative Jessup, can you help people understand how you hold the book on our issues, right? Almost all the issues that people here in our organization work on across our coalition, almost all of them end up on your desk in the Appropriations Committee. That gets to your committee's role in the process question. Can you help people understand a little bit how it is that we all end up trying to talk to you?
Well, because we can't get enough time on Zoom, Matt, that's why, right? So, well, the appropriations process is the spending side of the ledger. And unlike the policy committees, we have a very sprawling jurisdiction. So we are dealing with any bill that has spending attached. We're also dealing with the budget. And then, of course, all the federal stimulus spending that has come in. And so the way that we go about it in House Appropes is we divide up, for better or worse, although it's a little bit of, to some degree, an exaggeration, because of course there's overlap. And I happen to have the Department of Children and Families as one of my budgets, is the term we use. And so that's a huge budget. I mean, the Agency of Human Services is hopping, as my colleagues know, and all of you know who are in the building, at least the virtual building. And but then I also have other things. I have housing, I have the Human Rights Commission, I have any number of things. And in the Senate, that pressure is even more intense because there are fewer senators who are doing even more and serving on 2 committees. So we do as best we can, and we are citizen legislators, and we're scrambling, frankly, a lot of the time. And then the other pieces that happen, I think, that are important to understand with the appropriations process and that bill is the timing. So the bill starts, the budget being the bill, starts in the House and then it travels to the Senate. We're typically done at the end of March. And this year, if you'll recall, the ARPA funding passed March 11th. So that was just on the horizon and breaking when we sent off a budget, which landed in the lap of the Senate. And we had some guidelines and some a framework that we sketched out, and has already been said, the chambers work together very closely to enhance that and build upon it, all the while with this evolving background of guidance and rules, which is not to be underestimated, because there is no desire to go and return federal dollars that were deemed impermissible uses. So that's a very real concern on top of everything else. And so one of the things that we look at, similar to the policy committees, are finding the dollars to ensure capacity. So for example, when we pass the budget, within that budget, you'll see 6 positions were carved out. They're limited service positions, which means that they're not permanent. And 4 of them were for the Child Development Division that Representative Wood already talked about. And then 2 are in the business office. And these are folks who are dealing with grant and invoice processing for an additional 1,000 recurring payments. So we're looking at the policy pieces and taking what's coming in, and we're also looking at the capacity issues, and we're doing so across all the channels of government, so to speak. And so that's why we lean heavily on our colleagues and on our constituents and on advocates and on the administration.
Right.
It's what allows us to do our work.
Right. And so Senator Lyons, I wonder if you might observe briefly, so you all go second on the budget, right? It isn't always the case, but this year there was a lot of stuff where you went second as a Senate. You went second on the budget, you went second on 171. You went first on S100, the food nutrition bill, you all went first. So that has the opposite effect. But tell us what it's like to go second so that because we're here because we advocate, right? We're here because we want to talk to you. So help give our folks a flavor of what it's like when we reach out to senators on the budget related stuff and your policy committee, but you're going second. Give us just a couple minutes, just briefly, because I want to make sure we get to our third question. What's it like to have to compress all that into a really tight timeline?
Great question. And I will tell you that because we do work closely with our colleagues in the Human Services world, Human Services Committee, and we also work with all of you. It doesn't feel like we're second best. It does. We do get the bills after they have been worked on and improved. The child care bill was a bill that I actually introduced in the Senate side and then helped to get all of the data from the administration and put in the bill. And then it was a very good decision to have it begin in the House where those improvements were made and then went in through the appropriations process. So, and similarly for S100, I am on the Education Committee where the bill eventually came and we had to make some difficult decisions. The chair of Education worked closely with the chairs of Agriculture and House Education. So there was a good working relationship. Sometimes I hear from advocates, the bill is so good, don't make any changes. Just leave it the way it is as it came to you from the House. Don't touch it. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard that from some of you sitting right here. And that's a good thing. That means that the bill we're getting is a very acceptable policy and that if we did nothing would serve us all well. But, we're legislators and we like to make changes. Hopefully those changes are improvements. Sometimes we do things that have to be walked back. Sometimes we do things that walk forward. So, but it doesn't feel like we're second. It feels like we're a part of a team.
Right.
And so I'll stop there. I have, I could talk forever. I'm a legislator.
Right. Well, but I appreciate what you're saying because I think what I'm hearing is you say, look, if you come to us and say, this is a process, we're at this point in the process, will you please hear our input? That will sound better than if we sort of project the feeling of being rushed and compressed. It doesn't help you for us to project that, right? Might as well put it in a more positive term and say, and my colleagues are probably laughing at me because I'm always the negative one, but right. So put a positive spin on it and say, process is moving. We appreciate you're at this point. We hope that you'll hear what we have to say. I think that's an important thing for us to hear as we try to talk to, whether it's the House or the Senate, whoever's going second, try to be positive about that as opposed to, highlighting the pressure.
You're right. And the other thing is that not every single member of a committee fully understands everything that's happened in the other body. So when the bill comes over, it's really important to give the full committee an opportunity to understand what's in the bill, how did it get to us, and then what improvements might make it even better. So you are absolutely right. Keep it positive, because
Right.
we will listen. At least those of us sitting here will listen.
And you have, and we appreciate it.
Yeah.
So our last question for the panel is suggestions on what we should be doing now. So we'll start with Representative Jessup, and then go Senator Lyons, and then Representative Wood. So Representative Jessup, what should we be doing over the next 6 months to effectively interact with you and your colleagues in the process as you all go through the listening sessions and the different stakeholder engagement processes, the unknown of whether or not there'll be an October session, budget adjustment session that will budget adjustment activity that will start in December? Any clues or hints you have would be really appreciated. So we'll start with you, Representative Jessup.
So thank you. For me personally, one of the pieces that I struggle with is the fact that last year, between March and December, we spent nearly $40 million in federal stimulus funds. And now we have the latest one, which is ARPA. And I'm interested in hearing, how did that serve you? What was changed? And how does that connect going forward? I have in front of me a spreadsheet that has 22 lines on it of various funding that sources and pots, some of it regular. And then there's this distinction, of course, that's really important with this federal stimulus funding, which is the difference between one-time and ongoing. So we have all these federal funds, and I think sometimes there is not sufficient attention paid to the fact that they will go away, and we will be back to Vermonters and the tax dollars and other incoming sources of revenue that we have to pay for all the decisions that we make now. And that's something that we spend a lot of time on in our committee. So I guess the two pieces are what's happening in terms of one-time versus ongoing when we think about these stimulus dollars, and how does it tie back to investments we've already made moving forward?
I'm going to write that down. That's good. All right. Senator Lyons, your words of wisdom.
Yes, thank you. And Representative Jessup has hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of things that are both in the budget and in H-171 and S-100 that influence our whole child care, early education world. So I want to know, does the IT improvement, does that system help? Does it help you? What improvements are being made to center-based child care or family-centered child care? Are the scholarships that we have in place for new child care providers or others, or the loan repayment, what's happening with that? Is it working? Is it getting out? And because that is one-time, those are one-time dollars. And so we want to know, if we have more one-time dollars, is it efficacious to continue those programs? What do we need to do to put the system together? So I like to think about the system and how do we connect everyone? So what kinds of services are missing or being under resourced? I think in particular of the Children's Integrated Services, which is a huge issue. And it's an issue that I'm very concerned about, but I can't solve it. I need to know, what can we do to really resolve those problems with CIS and not continue to have pro bono services from some of our providers? What effect does enrollment-based payment have for the Head Start folks? What's going on when we have one-time infrastructure dollars for our parent-child centers and others? So how is all of this being utilized? These are really, really, really important concerns. And then the other thing is, how are you advocating for yourselves out in the business world? Because during COVID, businesses were apoplectic. Their workers needed childcare. Do they still see this as a value that we need to reinforce? And how are you helping us get that message out? How can I help you get the message out? So those are some of the, that's not a money issue necessarily, but it's certainly a very critical issue. So there are other things. Oh yes, CDD, how do we preserve its integrity and not undermine it? What's 0 to 5 like? What's 6 to 12 like? What do we do? How are the summer programs working? What role are you playing in that? I mean, there's so much we could, you've got a lot of work to do over the next
White
6
flag,
months.
white flag.
But thank you, because the people, you guys, and all of the people who are employed in childcare centers, I value so much. You are such caring human beings, and without you, our children are lost. So I just want to say thank you for that.
And remember that the same can be said about the folks who are working in the mental health system and with the nutrition programs and doing housing supports for families who are experiencing homelessness. I mean, I want to just gently remind everyone that, so it's a broad coalition here, right? Lots of different issues. And
I'm totally with you on all of that. I'm totally
no, I
with
know
you
you
on
mean,
all-
I know you mean that. We work together long enough so that I know you're using shorthand, but it's important to note. So it's all those folks working together that make it work. And you're right. I think Senator Lyons, it's going to be really interesting to see if there is some sort of decompression within the system of the people, right? All these people that you're talking about, what's going to happen when we get through the summer and hopefully with vaccinations and all the rest, what is it going to mean when all these people are experiencing their own little decompression events, right? As they try to move to normal, and then reporting back to you, legislators, this is what's happening out there in the world. And I think that's part of our work over the fall, as you say, is to report back to you on how things are going out there and what's happening, for sure.
And I just add one little tiny thing. So for all of the interests that you have mentioned, there's an appropriation, but there are also policies. And so when you are pleading with the Appropriations Committee, remember that it should begin with a policy committee. So that's
Right.
one of my biases.
Right. Got it. All right. Representative Wood, you get the closing comments of the panel, and then we'll go to breakouts. So.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to follow up and put an exclamation point on what Senator Lyons just said. And that's the exclamation point on starting with the policy committees in terms of where it is that you want to see things go. And it will be critical for us to know whether the investments that are being made over the last couple of years are having the desired impact, and that we will need to hear from you folks, because we will need to know, should we do more of the same or should we do something different? And we will have that opportunity in January, but between now and then, we need to know if the things that we have done already are the right things, or if we need to, pivot and maybe head in a slightly different direction. And that information is going to come from the field. And while it's not really, a popular topic to talk about, investments in government IT are critical. We've heard it from unemployment, we've heard it from the DCF systems, we've heard it from the health department systems, all through state government. They put out the Agency of Digital Services said we have over $1 billion in just IT projects that we could do. I mean, literally, we could have spent all of the money on IT projects. And so it is critical to know what are those things, what is part of the state's infrastructure that is prohibiting us from taking those steps forward. And if that means we got to make some investments in areas that aren't quite as sexy as, moving up the wages and stuff like that, we might have to do that. So I think that will be important. I did also want to mention, particularly for not everybody on the call that might realize is that we made a substantial step up in reach up this year. You know, moving up to the 2021 federal level, the financial levels, and that was a giant step forward. And for those folks who have individuals in their household who get SSI, those funds are now not considered as income again. You know, so you know we had sort of chipped away at that a little bit over the last couple of years, and now finally made the last step on that. So I just wanted to end with those positive notes about some of the things that have, you know, that really took priority in this budget.
Great. Well, that's a wonderful review. So many things for us to think about. Really appreciate all of your insights and your input. It's very much taken to heart. I wish we could all be in person and share the personal emotions and body language that goes with it. And I think you'd be hearing and feeling a lot of gratitude from all of us, to all three of you, for all of your work, your commitment, your openness, your communication, your patience with us as we come to you with our semi-frantic attempts to voice our concerns, and your patience at listening to us. It's all really appreciated. So we're going to move to breakouts. If the three of you would like to stick around, that's great, but please, we know you have lots of other things on your calendar. So we're a little behind, but I wanted to make sure we had plenty of time for this. So we're going to go to breakouts where we can have a chance to talk for 10 or 15 minutes about this more in small groups. We're going to go to 4 groups, I think, Lorna. So again, thank you to the legislators for your participation in our meeting and for your comments, and we'll have a chance to talk more about it in small groups for about 10 or 15 minutes. So thanks everyone. Lorna, you can go ahead and send us off to our groups.
Thank you, and take care.
Right. Thank you all.